Yeah, so there's two people that are waiting to get admitted, and so then I'll just admit you, and then we can.
Sorry about that this morning.
Oh my gosh, no, you're so. Hey, can you hear me?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I'm gonna make you the host.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
So you are now the host.
Okay, so oh, great. Can you see my drawing table?
I can see it. Can you click actually on my name and make me the host again? I thought we could both be the host, but it's so I can let everybody else in.
Okay, so click on your name.
Yeah, click on my name and go to more, and then drop down and it says make the host.
Okay, click on.
More, and then just the drop down and it says make the host.
Okay, I'm not sure what more is.
So if you go, so on the side, on the participant side,
Okay.
if
Oh,
you kind of go over and graze it out, and then it'll be the blue more.
okay, hold on.
Sorry, I thought it was making us both hosts.
Okay, so yeah, here we go. So go chat or.
More, and then just make host.
Okay. All right, I did that.
Perfect. Okay, I think Michelle set this up as a meeting so that people could ask questions as opposed to a webinar. So.
Okay. And so your video, it says it's locked.
It's locked?
It says the webcam is closed out.
I can see your page.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, so I see the white paper and the blue pencil, black pencil and the white pencil and pink eraser and.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So that's all there.
Okay, let me see if I can switch the screen. Hold on just a moment. Okay, I'm trying to see if I can switch the screen. Hold on just a moment. Okay, can you see the PDF?
I can, yes, that worked.
Perfect. Okay, good. I think we're in great shape.
So I can see both.
You can see my drawing table and?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm not sure can you see me drawing a line on the drawing board? I'm not sure if it's that clear.
I can see it.
Oh, good. Okay, great.
Yes.
Yeah, because I got a new webcam and the quality is not that great on it, but.
It looks perfect. I'm going to admit everybody, okay?
Okay, perfect. And then I think, Valerie, when we get everyone in, you just want to give me a clue to when I can start lecturing.
Absolutely. I'm going to do, hi guys. Thank you all so much for joining us. This is our very first virtual drawing class, and we want to thank Cantrell for working through this with us. We really, really appreciate it. We are going to start the class in just a little bit, just to make sure everybody gets here. And you guys are welcome to turn your videos on. You can unmute yourself and ask questions. Whenever you guys are ready, feel free to raise your hand. You can type things into the chat. I'll be here to help facilitate that. Let us know if you need anything. Jay is going to start with a little introduction about himself, some of his work, and from there, we'll get started. And Jay will give people maybe just 1 or 2 more moments to get in, and then we can get started. And I think we're looking at about 30 participants today. So thank you all for joining us.
Great. I think I'll probably get started in about 5 minutes. It's only like 1 after 12. So I think people are just kind of logging in. So Valerie, I think we have 20 people registered. Is that right, roughly?
We're actually at 35.
Oh my gosh, that's great. I think while we're waiting, I'm just going to flip through some of the images that I actually do for a living. I want to thank Valerie for inviting me to do this incredibly prestigious honor of teaching people how to draw. What I'm going to show you on my PowerPoint is just going to show you some of the work that I've done over the last 10 years. I teach architecture at UT Arlington. And the other thing is I just got a new webcam, so you really can't see my face. I'm not sure you really want to see that right now. But you're going to be looking at the PowerPoint and then, of course, the drawing table. I'll just kind of flip through some of the images and Valerie, just let me know when everyone's logged in and we'll kind of get started. Does that work?
Sorry, I didn't mute myself. That sounds great.
Okay. And so, I do a lot of watercolor and pencil renderings for other architecture firms and interior designers and architects. Yeah, most of these, of course, are based in Texas. But what I like to do is, in all the images I do, I like to show light and shade. I think it's a very powerful drawing medium to show light and shade in each one. These are renderings. We're going to be doing just some basic freehanded sketches. But these are some of the renderings I do for interior designers, architects, and other business professionals. And these are mostly professionals in Dallas. If you haven't really used software, a lot of these are mixtures of graphite and Photoshop. With Photoshop, you can cheat and you can make these incredible photorealistic effects with just some of the tools. But for the class today and then Thursday, we're really not going to be using Photoshop. We're just going to be drawing by hand. So this is really watercolor and pencil. This is for interior designers that, they just give me the floor plans. They really don't have a vision of what the room can be. But when they commission me to do these, these, of course, convey a certain amount of three-dimensional quality that I really couldn't imagine just in the floor plans. So I mix pencil and graphite, watercolor, pencil. It's 2020. I still think that my students and everyone still needs to be drawing by hand to convey, so they understand the space better. Okay, so before I go a little bit too further, that's really kind of what I do for a living. And of course, I do residential design work, then I teach architecture, and also I do walking tours of downtown Dallas on the weekends.
And we're up to 18 participants, so I think we can get started whenever you're ready.
Okay. And you said there's 35?
There is 35, but we can get started and see. There might be a few people who show up a little bit later.
Okay, good. Yeah, I just kind of like to have everyone at the same time so I can give an introduction. I guess I'll kind of go back. I think I'll kind of go back. Because I want to thank Valerie again for letting me teach the drawing class. There's going to be really 2 different classes: the freehand drawing class or orthographic projection today, and then on Thursday there'll be the perspective drawing class on Thursday. we were going over this morning, I had a lot of internet, a lot of webcam issues. So I think this first lecture, I'm just going to introduce you to my work. We're just going to give you some basic freehand drawing information, and then we'll do some more intense drawings on Thursday. So the Thursday class will be kind of a follow-up. Then we'll be talking about perspective drawing. So for the people that were not here right at 12 o'clock, I'm pretty widely published in the Dallas Metroplex area. I've had several articles. I do renderings for architects, interior designers, business professionals. These are some of the renderings I do. These are still really all drawn by hand. I just love to draw by hand. I think there's a certain magic to it. I do use computer software, but the computer software just kind of dictates all the three-dimensional quality for you. So a lot of these images have Photoshop mixed together with the hand drawings. This is a mixture of watercolor, pencil, and Photoshop. So this is really what I do primarily for, I teach architecture at UTA. The nice thing about this lecture is there are professionals and students that want to be here. When I'm teaching in architecture at UTA, some of the students sign up for classes really don't want to be there. So I think this class might be a little more engaging than some of my students, but anyway, we'll have to kind of work through that. So again, I like to show light and shade in pretty much every image I do. I think it's set as a certain amount of three-dimensional quality, a certain amount of depth, definitely a certain soul to each one of the images. This is still a one-point perspective, which we'll go over on Thursday, but again, it has graphite and watercolor in Photoshop. These are actually done for Ben Coates Builder. I don't know if you've ever heard of them or not. He has these really beautiful kind of transitional classical and modern houses. Okay, so these, are still some of the images from interior designers. I still like to use watercolor with pencil. Okay, so when we start drawing something, in my I'm teaching beginning architecture studios. I like to show the students how they can convey a certain amount of three dimensions without really drawing an axonometric or perspective. You can see the thickness of the wall. This is a wonderful wall at the Louvre in Paris, France. You can see the three-dimensional quality comes out with just the depth of the shadows on the walls. You don't have to render everything. Part of this class is drawing and rendering. So I'm going to show you some renderings later, but these are just some really quick preliminary drawings to show the depth of the shadows on the facade. These are just extraordinary facades. You don't have to go back and render everything, but you can still convey a certain amount of three dimension just by the virtue of the shadows. Again, this is a kind of an early, kind of a midday shadow. The colors are blue. Then a late evening sun, the colors are kind of red and brownish, like a late evening summer sun in Paris. So here's some of the exercises we're going to just quickly do today. If you look at these, these are just some very simple line drawings, but just look at the simplicity of just the line drawing. Then when you draw the shadows, wow, just a few little strokes. I like to say brush strokes because I'm still a painter, but I just like to show that the shadows add so much depth to the wall without manually calculating or using digital software to do an axonometric or perspective. You can create a certain amount of depth just by the language of the shade and shadows. So these are some of the exercises I'll be showing you this afternoon. If you guys have ever seen a book, it's called Shades and Shadows, drawn by Henry McGoodwin. It's a wonderful book published in the 1920s. He was a draftsman and an architect. He actually manually calculated the way shadows properly fall using solar angles and the sun position, the azimuth and the bearing on, some of these images. These are very sophisticated drawings. We're not going to be using these in class, but these are just some ideas to show how shadows actually are calculated and fall on the wall. You're probably thinking, oh my gosh, I'm intimidated, I can't really draw this. But in a few minutes, I'm going to show you how you can quickly show three dimensions just by just a few pencil strokes. There's some wonderful images in that book, Shades and Shadows. So let's take a look. This is a little pavilion I did, just a freehanded sketch with elevation. But then again, the client is not really going to be getting that excited about this because it doesn't really have enough three-dimensional quality to it. When we add shades and shadows, the client can clearly see how deep the niches are The fireplace is a special space on the facade. Then the fireplace projects again and again. There's a very simple drawing technique you can show your clients, or definitely yourself, just to convey a certain amount of depth. These, of course, is again from Shades and Shadows by McGoodwin. You can see how complex the proper calculation of the solar angles and the shadows that fall on a simple arch and a canopy. We get into more, so look how very complex the shadows are calculated with the volutes, the brackets. But the thing about the sun is the sun itself is a wonderful draftsman. He just actually draws an axonometric on the back plane of that. You can see that the sun kind of exaggerates the curvilinear forms. The same thing with these is we're not going to be drawing complex. So I just like to show my students and colleagues the language of properly drawing shades and shadows. Here's a simple rectangle with just some basic elements, which we'll talk about in probably about half an hour. Shades and shadows from a table. Shades and shadows on the stairs. Okay, before we get into drawing, I hope I'm not boring everyone. I just think that the language of drawing is a very fascinating way of communication. Drawing is a language of communication. Some of the first drawings were really not drawings of a building. They were some of the first drawings. I'm sure you've seen this in your art history class or history classes. But the cave paintings in Lascaux, France, roughly 15,000 BC. Those are some of the earliest form of drawings. Then later, when we get into Egyptian hieroglyphics, that was some of the first sort of regulated typography we had, because for the most part, we saw drawing as a language of communication for 12,000 years. We really didn't have any sort of lettering or words to convey information. So I had to rely on drawings as a way of communication. I think this is fascinating that for 12,000 years between the cave paintings and the hieroglyphs, we had 12,000 years of nothing but just drawings to convey ideas and information. So when you get to Egyptian hieroglyphs, there's some of the the earliest form of communication to convey a sort of word or phrase or sentence. Sorry, I live in downtown Dallas, so I forgot to mention that, and there's always ambulances and fire trucks. Let's hold off on that for just a moment. I teach sophomore design students, and all of a sudden they hear that. It's like, where do you live? I said, well, I live on Main Street in downtown Dallas. I just like this neighborhood because there's so many wonderful, beautiful buildings, but it does yield some pretty much extensive traffic noise. But given that, I just thought this was a fascinating study of drawing as a language. So we look at some of the early cave paintings. This is, discovery in Lascaux, France, around 15,000 BC. Now, the drawings were really not here to look, and I'm sure you've probably seen this in your history classes, but the drawings were really not here to look pretty. They weren't just pretty postcard pictures. These were probably cave people that were looking at to see which animals to kill, which animals to fight. And you can imagine the setting in this cave, it probably had a large bonfire. You can see it's probably an early form of visual animation. With the fire flickering, you can see the animals moving across the screen. It's kind of an early visual animation. A very kind of dangerous setting, but yields the language of drawings. There's a lot of stories, a lot of information going on in just these pictorial images without having a proper lettering format. So then we get to Egyptian hieroglyphics. There's still drawings. It's a mixture of wonderful discussion of drawings and letters together in one field. We still have trouble figuring out exactly what these symbols mean. But this is a very early form of lettering. We think of lettering and drawing as both interchangeable. I just thought that was fascinating that 12 or thousands of years, they didn't have a proper lettering. They had drawings to convey ideas. So clearly, each one of these images is a drawing that represents an idea or sort of a preliminary sort of lettering system. We talk about the language of drawing to communicate to yourself or an idea or client. But again, we're going to be talking about many different types of drawings. This is not a rendering. This is simply just a three-dimensional sketch to convey what the kitchen would look like. Again, the range of the freehand drawings versus the hardline drawings. Again, these are some other sophisticated drawings from McGoodwin's Shades and Shadows. And when we talk about renderings, this is really not a rendering In the class that I'm teaching, we're going to be talking about several different types of drawings. We're not going to be doing only renderings. We're going to be doing simple shades and shadows. Like I said, we're not going to be doing cave drawings. They've already been established. But then we talk about shades and shadows. We're going to be doing some of those simply as a freehand drawing. I just like to show the range of types of drawings we can do. If you think about the language of renderings, Piranesi, I'm sure you've seen Piranesi's extraordinary, renderings. He pretty much depicted tons of scenes of Rome based on his language of the intensity of light and dark. So pretty much each one of these images have a certain amount of chiaroscuro. You talk about Piranesi's engravings. He actually did a lot of renderings for the classical architect's language. If you look at a lot of Robert Adam, because I know everyone is mostly classical architect in here. So if you look at a lot of the renderings for Robert, I think Piranesi did a lot of the renderings for his office. So he did a lot of kind of rugged ruins that are existing in Rome. Then, of course, he actually did some, this is roughly the 1700s. You can see his language of the intensity of light and dark, and the shades and shadows. You can see how much depth this facade has just by the way Piranesi is carefully drawing these. The same thing with these extraordinary cross sections. The same thing with the elevations. When you talk about renderings, the thing about what I show my students is I like to show renderings as kind of an analytic dialogue. They're not just renderings to convey light and shade. These are actually studies. Its name is Augustus Choisy. He did entire pamphlet booklet of the history of architecture just in drawing. So these are axonometrics of probably, I think, the palace, Domitian's palace there in Rome. These are probably some of the basalt diocletian. He's actually drawing what the structure would look like. And unfortunately, this slide is a little blurry because I'm not able to clarify some of the information. But he was very emphatic about drawing every single little brick detail. But you can see that the drawing is not just a pretty rendering. It shows an idea. It shows the cross-section of the structure, how the copper ceiling works with the concrete and the masonry. The same thing, he's showing the structural capabilities in the rendering. So these renderings are really telling about the structure and the nature of the composition, not just pretty drawings. The next series of slides are some renderings I've done. This is for the Dallas Country Club. I'm sure if you've actually done some extravagant, wonderful parties there. The front gallery has probably 6 of the entire clubhouse drawings there exhibited in the gallery. What I'm showing you is because this is the language of graphite. This is really renderings done with just one media, pencil. The pencil is the mighty sword in drawing. You can get a range of textual range of values. I know these are probably a little bit more intimidating for some of the people in the class right now, but we're not going to be doing these for the seminar. These are just some examples of the range of pencil. These have maps. What's interesting about these is that the early Dallas Country Clubhouse was formulated, began in the Oakland area. They were actually chasing cattle to hit the golf holes in these early sort of fields. But what I'm showing is the range of pencil has a very intense dialogue, of very dark chiaroscuro chambers, and of course the light that hits the facade. So each one has a mixture of the maps and of course the drawings in front of it. What I'd like to show is just because it's a rendering, looks like a photograph, doesn't mean you have to draw everything. Like, for example, if you see the top of the pediment, I don't need to draw a line to convince people that this pediment continues. The wonderful thing about drawing is you can leave certain elements out that actually tells a story. I don't need to go back and draw every little detail for the ionic capitals. They're just there to exist just by the language of the shades and shadows. And what's nice is you can see the texture of it is not just completely smoothed out. When I teach my students and in class, university, I still like to show the texture of the pencil. I still like to do painting, so I like to see the brushstrokes. But this is just kind of an intriguing image of, instead of making everything shaded in like a photograph, then you can leave some of the parts out. These are some images I did. If you've heard of Ralph Dusing, I used to work for Ralph Dusing for 10 years. He was probably, I want to put him as probably the best architect in Dallas. This is an extraordinary individual. He draws and paints, and his drawings are phenomenal. These are some cross sections I did for some of his projects, and he just loved to show light and shade. These are cross sections of this round tower. This is a small detail, But look at the intensity of the dark background that makes the cross section project out from the picture plane. Here's a larger detail. This is just a wonderful house that was set in Vermont. The trees are probably 60 feet tall, but in the drawing you can abstract these to look like these tall columns. You know, again, there's a mixture of floor plans that show the tower, the cross section. The nice thing about this one is the cross section is clearly articulated just by the white space alone. And then the graphite is the shading to project the picture plane back into the image in the background. Again, you know, these are still some details from the country club. You know, a lot of people look at the images and think, oh, I can't draw like a photograph. Well, it just really takes, it starts with a few lines with a few shades. You can build up the shadows and values. It's not a perfect drawing at all because you can see the overlines in the construction drawings. Again, there's Robert Adam. I'm gonna go back to some of the preliminary stuff we're going to be doing. So that's kind of a brief overview of what I do in architecture, what I do in drawing. I still love to draw every day. Let's, before we kind of take a break, I just want to entertain questions before we move on. Any questions about anything about the drawing so far?
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you tell us what type of paper and technique you use when you transfer your digital work, your 3D work into a medium that can then accept watercolor?
Yeah, that's a good question. I like the questions about technique. You know, Vasari has written books and dialogues about technique alone. So if you look at these images, this is simply drawn on probably like a 150-pound hot press watercolor. I like to use hot press because it's pressed into a hot iron, so the paper is extremely smooth. You can get some very clear details. This is simply just a watercolor preliminary on watercolor paper, a thin layer. Then I scan it in to Photoshop and I go back and highlight some of the details. You can see the light coming in from the window here on the left. So really, this is not a digital drawing at all. This is simply a one-point perspective printed, I'm sorry, not printed, but drawn on watercolor paper. And then with watercolor washes, I scan it in when it's dried and then just go back and add the little details for the lights. And so for some of the other highlights. It is really easy to do the light coming in with Photoshop. You can fence these things off and intensify the light coming in. You know, these are really done on some rough Strathmore paper. These are done in, you know, watercolor paper. What I did was, this is a mixture. I did the floor plan on a piece of vellum, then I did the watercolor on a watercolor piece of paper. Then I scanned both of those in and changed the opacity levels in Photoshop and had this composition of the perspective and the floor plan together. So, again, this is a nice piece of Strathmore paper. You know, your really good materials will affect the outcome of the drawing or rendering. You know, if you're drawing this on Xerox paper, there's no way you're going to get good quality on Xerox paper at all. That's a very good question. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sure. I was going to show you any other questions about some of the images or the drawings?
I have a simple question.
Yes.
What sort of pencil do you use and lead size and that sort of thing?
Yes, we'll go over those in just a minute. I'm going to flip my
Okay.
screen so you can see my drawings.
Very good.
I'll get some pencils out. Any questions before I flip the screen over? I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions to ask. Okay, so hopefully everyone has a sketchbook. I'd like for you to sort of take notes and try to draw on your own. I'm just going to give a quick demonstration on how to properly draw this arch with the niches on the left and the right side. You can see the floor plan. And Valerie, I'm going to suffer through changing the screen over to my drawing tool, so bear with me for just a minute.
You got this. It's going to be flawless.
Okay. I was really worried. I was talking to Valerie this morning because I'm used to using Microsoft Teams, or we're using Zoom, and I'm not used to changing over. So hold on just a moment. You know, this is our first digital seminar, so you have to kind of bear with me. I'm not the best digital person in the world, but it is important to mix computer and drawing. Let's see if I can enlarge this. Okay, Valerie, any suggestions on how to do this?
So everyone can do it themselves too. So there's the swap shared screen with video. Can everybody see it now?
Well, can everybody see my drawing table?
I can.
Okay, good. Do you know how to enlarge it?
It's enlarged, it's just blurry.
It's just, okay. Can you see me drawing a pencil line on this clearly?
Yep. Yeah, but it's just a little out of focus.
Okay, what about this? Is that better?
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay, let me change the scene. What I'm going to show you is, and then I can, after the lecture, I can give you a list of tools. What you're going to be needing to do the preliminary studies is, if you look at the art, you're going to be using an HB or a 2B lead. Can you see the pencil in this? Can you see that at all?
Yes.
Okay, so really you need some basic drawing tools. You need the pencil sharpener. You need the graphite pencils. You can use HB, 2B, preferably Statler pencils. One of the other companies called Kimberly pencils, but she had no idea what she was doing when she established the different line weights. So her pencils are not the proper range of intensity. If you use Statler or Canson pencils, those are the supreme pencils that you would need. The only two erasers you ever need in your entire life is the pink pearl and the kneaded eraser, which I don't have with me. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to sketch an example of the arch that we just saw. You can see the arched opening with the niches on the image, right? Valerie, can you see that?
Yes, I'm swapping back and forth between the two.
Okay. Okay, I'm just going to quickly draw an elevation of just the curve. So the first thing I'm going to draw is just the opening with the arch. You're probably thinking, oh my, can you guys see the freehanded arch I just did?
Yeah.
Yes.
You're probably thinking, how do I freehand a perfect circle? It's a freehand. There's several different techniques you can do. To draw a curved arch, what you can do is if you're not comfortable freehanding an arch, you know, what you can do is just take the midpoint. Can you guys still see this?
Yep.
Okay, take the midpoint, then of course the radius will be the same height, and I would just carefully draw some dots to show the curve so it's just as precise as possible. Then I would just go back and simply connect the dots with your freehand. It just will take some practice drawing the curve naturally. Okay, so let's go back and draw the arch with the niches on either side. The spring line is here, the niches are back here. So when we draw light and shade, you know, if you choose a solar angle here or here, it's going to take, of course, which part the shadows are drawn in. So let's just take the sun is drawn from the left side, probably, you know, 2 in the afternoon. So eventually the sun will cast the same profile on the back wall, exactly the same curve, the same radius. Then, of course, the shades and shadows will be filled in lightly with an HB or 2B lead. The same thing with this rectilinear arches. But you know, look how three-dimensional just that one image is. If you were to bring this to your clients, if you show them this and this, you know, you're going to be thinking, well, how do I show how deep these things are? Well, look how convincing just that one image is with just some simple shading and shadows on it is. So let's turn the paper over for just a moment. So I'm just going to show just some simple boxes. You have to make sure that the angle is really roughly 45 degrees just to show the light and shade on this. When you start shading, I like to show a consistent 45-degree angle because it looks more professional than just shading it like this and it's multi-directional. It looks very unprofessional and very sophomoric to do that. So if you maintain a consistent grain to the shading, then of course you can establish a certain amount of quality. Then of course with some of the lighter pens, you can go back and maybe if there's a niche inside of this, then you can draw lightly a 45-degree angle. Like that. And then with the pencil, you can go back and shade in the parts that are very much further recessed in. Can you guys see that? It's a very easy way to convince 3 dimensions just by the elevation sketch. Okay, can you see the arch niche on the screen in the PDF? Can everyone see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So let's take a look at that. If I were to draw these, I would probably draw the arch niche, and just to practice, the horizontal line is called the spring line, where all the arches begin. This like that. Then what I would just do is just freehand the way the shadows have a curvilinear profile on these, and just practice showing the shades and shadows. And so when you're drawing these, make sure if you draw a niche or a recess, I'm sorry, that's terrible. Is that you show kind of a nice outline and then have the shadows die into it. A lot of my students, when they draw shades and shadows, they'll just arbitrarily draw the shadows like this. And there's no definite end to the shadows. It looks cleaner if you actually lightly draw a line in. Like that. Okay, any questions about that so far? Are you guys drawing your sketchbook?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm going to show you something, drawing light and shade is not the only way to draw images. I'm just showing these because these can intensify your sketches for your clients or just for your own sort of benefit. So let's kind of take a look at some other studies to do. I'm just going to quickly draw an ionic capital, the volutes, and make sure the entablature is exactly, the fascia is exactly in line with the edge of the column. Quickly draw that. Then if the sun is over here, then watch what happens. You can quickly draw some shades and shadows on some very complex. So you use your trace paper. The sun actually transfers this exact profile from this edge onto the back plane. All I have to do is shift it down 45 degrees, like that. And then what I would do is go back and shade in. But look how three-dimensional just that image is. Then, of course, I would quickly draw a shadow from the top of this onto the bottom like that, the astrals here. But look how much more powerful this is than just the line drawing itself. It's just a matter of practicing drawing the profile, then shifting it down, and then drawing the shades and shadows. Those are just some very basic techniques. Okay, so let's take a look at some other details. Let's take, for example, the if you're looking at a photograph, you want to draw a photograph, like say if I'm drawing, a pediment like this from a photograph. Let's just picture a wonderful pedimented facade opening by Michelangelo, probably the Capitoline Hill, the Farnese Palace. A lot of my students, when they look at photographs, they start drawing something, then they completely miss the point in the proportions. In other words, I've seen tons of students where the pediment is 45-degree angle and the windows are very smushed in. So in other words, this proportion doesn't look anything like the actual window. So what you have to do is, in your preliminary studies, I would investigate, draw a 45-degree line. So obviously the pediment is roughly 22.5 degrees. You remember from classical architecture, the language of the angles of the pediment. Because, obviously, a lot of students are doing this just by quick observation. They think that the pediment is all 45 degrees, but definitely not. 45 degrees is a very steep angle. If you look at classical pediments, they're much more shallower than that. But what I would do is, let's just take a nice image or a drawing of, let's just say, a classical pediment. And the reason I'm using markers is because this is the clearest thing you can see. Normally I would be drawing with an HB or 2B lead, but you're probably thinking, if I wanted to draw this on my sketchbook, how would I properly draw this just from observation? There's some rules you can investigate in drawing just from observation without having to measure something on an architectural blueprint. So the first thing I would do is try to figure out what the squares are. Maybe this facade fits into 2 squares. Maybe this is the angle of a golden section. So when I go back and draw these, what you would do is just quickly do some analysis studies to show how to properly draw this to scale. Let's kind of redraw that again. In Dallas, some of the best classical architecture is, some of it is in downtown Dallas. A lot of it is at the SMU University. There's some beautiful classical buildings that Mark Lemon designed that you can study and analyze. But, when I'm talking about proportion, you can show proportional analysis as a preliminary study to actually draw the final drawing. So possibly the entire window is maybe these 2 squares. And then maybe there's another square up here that forms the diagonal like that. If you remember from your history or your proportion classes in architecture, is that the regulating line shows the proportional relationships, the diagonal. So then possibly some of the windows could be the same proportioning opening as the actual window itself. So you can probably start quickly drawing some squares. Maybe this pediment fits into 3 squares. Then you can go back in and draw in the pediments here, the window here. So when you start drawing these things, you're not just arbitrarily sketching them, you're figuring out the actual ratio of length to width on the facade. So possibly, you know, this window is the same diagonal as the larger bay itself, like that. So in your sketchbook, you can start drawing. If you know the nomenclature of the shades and shadows, you can start drawing. Then if you establish a 45-degree angle from the sun, you can probably start drawing some of the shadows like that. Then, of course, on the back plane, you'll be showing the profile of the window there. You know, I'm just quickly showing these just to keep your attention. But, you know, look how much more three-dimensional this looks versus just the simple line drawing like that.
It's stunning.
I'm going to show you some other images that when we talk about what's called orthographic projection, can you see the PowerPoint? I'm sorry, let me get that. Can you see the PowerPoint? Okay, when you talk about, you know, orthographic projection is simply just, I'm sure you know what orthographic is, parallel and perpendicular. We talk about projection. This might be a little bit boring to you, but it's really important to know if you want to actually draw something properly. Let's say, you know, we have the dormer window. It can be a dormer window. It can be a doorway, so on and so forth. You know, orthographic projection is you start with a floor plan like this. So then what you do is you start with your floor plan first. And then you project up graphically how to properly draw this elevation. Then the other part is the cross section. If you want to draw a cross section through this, if you look at the photographs or the drawings, you can see how far the pediment projects out from the opening. Again, shades and shadows will tell you that the window is deeply inset into the wall. So if I were to draw a section through that, you just cast over construction lines. Then what you do is you just kind of fill in the blanks. You're going to be showing me the cross section through that window like that. And then I like to go back and post shade in the parts that are the mass of the wall like that. So when we talk about a projection, it's orthographic because you're parallel and perpendicular to the actual floor plan itself. So let's take a look at let's take a look at a doorway. The plan of the doorway is here. You know, I'm drawing a very layered series of brick arches that create an entry condition from here. So in other words, if I want to draw an elevation, if I don't have a photograph, I would simply just continue the lines up like this, like that. And then I would just go back in and draw, just you can imagine an arched doorway here, like that. The spring line continues the placement of the arches, like that. Like that. So that way you're not just drawing these arbitrarily to force, you're not just drawing these arbitrarily just based on observation. There's a different drawing system to properly draw things. Then if I were to draw a cross section, pretty easy, right? You would just draw some construction lines across to here like that. And again, I have to just imagine that you really haven't drawn anything before. So this is a very beginning lesson on what to do. So I would just quickly draw the same thickness, so on and so forth. The door is here. Like that. So that's really the language of orthographic projection. So the reason it's called projecting because you're projecting from plan, the elevation and the cross section over. If you look at a lot of architectural sections and details, this is exactly how they do these. Then I like to draw a nice center line because classical architecture is very symmetrical and centered like that. Then if I were to actually attempt to draw shades and shadows on this one, I would take the trace paper trace over that, shift it down. There'll be a multiple layer of shadows on the wall. Well, this is not the best example, but then of course the shadow on the door would be here like this. So then you would go back in and shade the actual door. So that way you can tell that the door is the furthest thing back from the picture plane. So, but just by those basic techniques, look how much more three-dimensional and powerful your sketches can be, even your sketchbook or for your clients. So, these are some very basic, simple studies you can do. Again, if you look at this elevation of the arches, just the nature of the shadows will tell you what the profile of the floor plan looks like. So again, the spring line is transferred down here further, then the arch is the same radius as the edge. So in plan, you can see that the plan is a square recess cut into the wall, like that. Then if you draw the shadows in plan and project up like orthographic projection, you can see where the shadow actually falls on the back plane like that. So let's take a look at the curved floor plan. If this were actually curved, let's look at the shadow first. The shadow has this really funky curving. I'm not expecting beginners to actually construct that, but you can tell by the language of this profile versus this one is that the plan of this is curved. Because probably the shadow is here. So then the shadow ends on this edge. Can everybody still see this clearly?
Jason, can you move your sheet of paper down a little bit? I can't see the top. Perfect. A little bit more there.
Oh no, did you guys just miss the whole lecture?
Well, it's when you get to sometimes when you get to the top of the page, we can't see what's,
yes.
But now we can.
Okay, so does that make sense? Did you hear what I was talking about? The purple.
Can you do that again? Can you do, that would be awesome if you could show that again.
Okay, sure. So this is clear, you can see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm saying is you can tell the profile, the plan of these objects just by the language, just by the nature of the shadow. So you can tell that this shadow is an orthogonal cutout niche and plan. You can see the red, right? So then if you're to cast the shadow on the plan, then the shadow will be projected up orthographically onto the back plane like that.
Mm-hmm.
So then that means that there's a flat plane behind this. If you look to the image on the right, you can see that sort of funky curvilinear shadow. What is going on? Well, it makes that curve. Well, in plan, you can see that the shadow is cast on the extreme edge inside that niche and then project up and then profile that. So in other words, in section, the reason that funky little wave is because the niche is curved in section like that. If this were a flat plane, then the curve would be directly cast from this edge onto the back plane like that.
Mhm.
If this were curved, then it was a very complicated system of actually drawing the shadows on the curve like that. So if you look at elevations, you can clearly tell the curvilinear niches versus the flat niches, which is a very interesting drawing technique just to show that. Okay, so does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Sure. Let me see. It's 12:50. Why don't we take like about a 5-minute break? I'm gonna break. We're gonna be doing some other sketches. This will give you some time to get. Hopefully you guys are working your sketchbooks, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I think we're just gonna continue doing some freehand drawing exercises. Let's take about a 5 to 10-minute break. We'll come back. It's at 1 o'clock. It's 12:50. Do you have any questions about the drawing exercises so far? Okay, let's take a break and regroup about 1 o'clock, and then I'll show you some other exercises. Does that work? Perfect.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I think we have about 1 more minute. Can everybody, are the images still really blurry on the webcam? Valerie, can you see these?
They're just a smidge blurry. I don't know if there's anything we can do about it today, though.
Okay, but you can at least see the drawings, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Good. Can you guys see which building this is on the screen? We have about 1 more minute.
I can see a building. I don't know which one it is.
Okay. Any guesses as to which building this is? Anyone in the class? Come on.
Trevi Fountain.
Very good. Have you been to the Trevi Fountain?
Yes, in Thurman.
It's absolutely a magical place to be. It's extraordinary, isn't it? The figures, the fountains. Yes. We're going to be drawing that a little bit later. You're probably thinking, oh my gosh, I can't draw. There's too many. I can't even do this. There's a very simple way to actually approach a very complicated drawing assignment. So do we have everyone back in the seminar? Okay.
There isn't going to be a way for me to know that, so we can just continue on.
Okay. Oh, good. Okay. Well, we're going to take it back from that first. I'm going to show you some basic drawing for objects. And okay, so you guys can see the paper, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Good. Now, these are just studies of just some very, very basic objects. Let's take a look at the nature of drawing a cylinder. You can see both the cube and the cylinder.
Yep.
Okay, hold on just a moment. Okay, so there's some very easy ways to approach this. You have to just do a method of practice. To draw the cube like this, you have to make sure that the top of that is 90 degrees. You can rotate the paper to draw a perfect rectilinear cube or rectangle like that. Then just cast in exactly parallel the corners like that. So we get to the cylinder, you can try to draw a perfect circle and plan like this. Then you can project down. You know, and also, I know you guys are probably drawn before. These are just some very basic beginning exercises. If you're bored of this, then let me know. But I mean, I'm going to be showing you some other sophisticated drawing types to actually make these objects more three-dimensional. So let's take a look at the cube for a minute. So can you see the second one I'm drawing? This one? Can you guys see that? Okay. Let me kind of redraw that for just a moment. Okay, if I were to draw shadows on that, it gets a little bit more complex than just doing this. Like if I were to draw the shadows on this rectangular object, then of course the sun would be here. In other words, the shadow angles would cast shadows like this. In other words, again, the sun transfers this edge onto the back plane and fills in the shadows, of course, with just nothing but shadow. But when we shift into 3 dimensions, it's quite a bit different. So in other words, the shadow on this is really here. And then in planets like this, you just simply connect the dots. This is the same angle as that. And then you just go back in and shade in the proper shadow. One thing to keep in mind, really 2 things. This, the shadow, and then the parts in shade. The shadow is 99% darker than the part in shade because there is reflected light from the ground onto the perpendicular plane. Does that make sense to everyone? So if you're drawing just a simple cube like this, is that, you know, just kind of imagine and plan the shadows coming like this, like that. Then the solar angle is roughly here. So then what happens is these corners are transferred down onto the back plane like that. Wow, that just made everything 3 times as difficult, didn't it? You don't have to actually know how the shades and shadows work just to do a 3-dimensional drawing like that, right? You can just kind of imagine. You have to keep in mind that the shadows that are cast are exactly parallel and perpendicular to the edges like that. So in other words, it's not this. Because the shadow has to be exactly the same angle as this one, so it would really be this one. So then the sun transfers these corners down onto the back plane like that. Does that make sense at all?
Mhm.
Okay, it's just a matter of practicing drawing those. There's only so much I can tell you. You have to just kind of, because, you know, architecture and drawing is a heuristic process. What I mean heuristic is you learn by doing. You have to kind of just do it. There's only so much I can tell you. You have to practice and draw. These are just some techniques to show how you can make just a simple dumb cube look really compelling and 3-dimensional just by the nature of the shades and shadows. We'll go back to that in a minute. Let's take a look at the cylinder as an object. So if we want to draw the cylinder, I would simply just draw. You can use a circle template to draw the curves like this. You can project down the same curve that's here is going to be transferred here, like that. Then you would just go back and maybe outline just the outline of the cylinder. So let's look what happens when we start drawing shades and shadows on that object. So if we were to draw a plan of this, the plan is here. Let's just take, for example, the solar angle. So hold on. Let me kind of rework that. I think that's. Okay, you can see the curve, right? Here's the plan. Say, you know, if the sun is over here, then of course the sun is going to be drawing a profile of the cylinder here. What does that look like in shadows? In other words, the shadow is here, so what you're going to be doing is plan projection. You would project that up. Then you would lightly show the the parallel lines to make sure that the shadow is darker on the left side because the shadow is actually here. So what the sun is doing is if you cast a 45-degree angle here, then in here is that the same curvilinear form here is going to be exactly portrayed onto the back plane like that. So I'll just go back and shade that in. But just make sure when you're shading these that the shadow is always darker than the part in shade because the shadow is actually the absence of light. It's missing light. And the part in shade, can everyone see this? And I have the worst architectural block. I'm better at drawing than writing. But the part in shade does have reflected light from the table or the surface here. So it's not going to be completely dark. So does that kind of make sense? But I mean, look how killer just these dumb sketches look. It's just a cylinder. But with shades and shadows, look how three-dimensional this looks. You know, and then what I like to do is go back in the background and show maybe some value around this to make this object project off the page. Like that. So that way the white is projected out from the back plane. Okay, are you guys still with me?
Yes.
Okay, good. You know, a lot of this is just, it's just, you know, I'm giving you some introduction. It's really, you have to just practice drawing these things because architecture is a discipline. You got to practice these. But just the few sort of studies I've shown you should really sort of elevate your sketches in your sketchbook. But look how great, you know, if I were just to simply draw the cube, that looks boring. But with the shadows, wow, it just jumps off the sheet like that, doesn't it? Then I could go back and maybe draw a border. Probably the pencil's a little blurry, but it just draws some value showing that the cube is the predominant object on that field. Any questions about that so far? Okay, so is everyone drawing these in your sketchbook? I'm sure, hopefully you guys are. I was going to show you, there's some other tools that you can use besides the pencil. I like to use the micron pens. If you can see these, the micron, they're wonderful drawing tools. Micron, a range from 0.5 to 0.4. These are really for sketching, not really for shading, but the micron pens are much better and easier to work than the Rapidograph pens that have the ink you have to fill into it. So. Okay, so I think some of you guys have actually drawn before, right?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm not going over some basic stuff that you're bored with. But, you know, I know these are just some basic orthographic projection systems. Let me show you another technique. You know, if these subjects are very complicated, please let me know. I can do some simpler ones. But let's just take like a curved pediment from Michelangelo. You know, if you're drawing from observation or from in a photograph, then you can actually, you can sort of graphically draw the proper proportion. If, you know, this rectangle might be a golden section, but to draw that, if it is, you'd have to analyze this in your sketchbook. To draw the golden section, let's just take a square like this. What you do is take the midpoints. With the compass, you draw from the midpoint to the edge, the curve, then that will actually give you the golden section ratio. I'm sure you guys have seen this in your studies or your classes before. So in other words, like say if I were to draw a Michelangelo portal, then possibly this entire rectangle is a golden section. But really to study that, you have to draw the square first, the midpoint, like that. And then you would actually be able to figure out, okay, this opening is a harmonious proportion, it's a golden section. Then possibly when you start on the pediment, maybe the pediment is the same golden section. We have to actually analyze that first. So obviously you can see that this pediment is actually not a golden section because the golden section is here. This is probably two squares, 1, 2. So just by the nature of the squares, you can figure out multiple proportional relationships. Like if I were to draw that pediment just without even looking at, I mean, just without even having a blueprint, I can probably graphically draw the two squares, 1, 2. Then there's one square. Divide that in half. Then you'd have to use a compass, or you can actually use your visual compass or eye. Wow, look, I've already drawn the proportion of that window without worrying about the curves and all the details. Then I would go back in and draw the curved pediment, the entablature. You know, maybe the opening is the same angle as the larger opening itself. Maybe the transom window is 90 degrees to the regulating line. So boom, check that out. I've already drawn the whole thing without just worrying about all the little details. You can carefully draw this elevation just by using some very, very basic graphic techniques, by just using the squares as a preliminary study. And if I'm going too fast, please let me know. I know you guys are kind of beginners. Okay, so let's look at the Trevi fountain. You guys can see this on the table, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so if I were to assign you, let's draw an elevation of the Trevi. Can you see all the details, the curve of the arch niche, the sculpture?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm in Rome. I don't know how to draw. I can't draw. It's too complex. There's too many, whatever. There's a very easy way to draw a very complex subject. You can actually identify these parts as a geometrical relationship. So you can see the trace paper, right? This is a very unsophisticated way of, oh my goodness. Okay. So let's take a, you can see the trace paper, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's take a look at the facade. So the facade is a large rectangle. If you can you see the diagram we're doing above that? Large rectangle. You know, this is the one have, but how would I get the proportion of this part? First, I would just carefully look at the entire elevation like this. Pardon me, but the book is folded in the center of that. What I'm saying is that if you draw a regulating line all the way across the facade in your mind or on the photograph, then you can actually transfer that angle like this. You already have the entire box drawn in. Then what I would do is go back and see if you can figure out where the square is. So maybe the square is here, where that second column occurs. So then on your elevation, you would project that square. You already know that this is the second column. The first column is roughly over here. So that way you can start, and then of course the spring line for the arch is roughly at the center. So at least your graphical analysis will show you how to properly place these objects in that geometrical field like that. And then maybe this rectangle is a golden section. You have to draw the square. Can you guys still see this?
Move it a little bit over the whole book a little bit to the right.
Like this.
Perfect.
So in other words, what I was saying is, how would you get the proportion between this edge and of course the edge of the column? You could possibly draw the square, you could draw the golden section, then you take your compass from the midpoint to the endpoint. Boom. Look at that. The left bay of that facade is a golden section. Great. So when you draw your larger section, you already know that's a golden section. Here's column number 1, column number 2. Then you just mirror that. So that way you already have the entire facade drawn in. Then later I would just go back in and try to draw the openings, the columns march along here, so on and so forth. There's a very simple way to draw very complex subjects like that. Then the last thing I would do is go back and try to draw those sculptures. Okay, so any questions about that so far? Okay, let's go back to some of the images. You can see the PDF file, right?
Yes.
Okay. Let's look at this diagram. You can see the rectilinear block on plan. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay, and you can see my sketch table, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so let's take a look at that block. You know, it's relatively a very simple drawing. It's just that rectangular block. Maybe this is 2 squares, maybe a golden square. I don't know. But if you're drawing solar angles, then possibly you could draw a 45-degree angle like this. Then, of course, from here, I'm sorry, 45, 40. These have to be exactly the same angle. Then like that. Then you would just project that shadow because the sun cast the same edge from here down onto the floor. Then you would just go back in and shade with a nice consistent grain. The shades. But you know, look how powerful just that one move with your pen or pencil can make the images read stronger like that. You know, especially with this technique, you know, just by tracing the profile of the column, the entablature onto the back wall, you have a convincing image of shadows on that. Because the sun is casting those angles across like that. Then if you have white pencil, you can go back in and highlight some of the parts that are highlighted like that with a colored pencil. Then you can go back in and wow, look how that just jumps off the page like that. Okay, let's do some other exercises. And let me know if I'm going too fast. Okay, so let's quickly try to draw the little pavilion I've uploaded on the PDF. Just kind of a refresher. This is what's called an alcove with a fireplace in it. So in other words, I'm showing the facade. And again, to get the proper proportion of the facade, you can actually try to draw it in 2 squares. Like that, then so on and so forth. Then I would draw the arch like this. Then with your solar angles, I would just kind of nominally draw a 45-degree angle and cast these edges back like that. The same thing with each one of these. Like that, so on and so forth. It always looks so much better to have your angles at the same angle, your cross-hatching at the same angle. You know, then if I were to analyze this elevation of this facade, then possibly this the regulating line that goes across like that could be the same angle as these. You'd have to just kind of draw and analyze that. It kind of looks like this might be a little bit too squatty for the verticals on here, but just by virtue of putting shadows on the elevations, then the three-dimensional quality reads much stronger. Then I kind of did this backwards. Normally you have a plan that you draw first, and then the fireplace goes up like that, like this. Then you just go back and then shade in the actual plan. I did this backwards. Normally you draw the plan first and then you cast up like that. Then if I were to draw a section through this thing, I would just draw an imaginary cutting plane line through here. Then with construction lines, cast this thing over. You know, and I love to draw a fireplace section. They're so animated because, you know, then you'll show this, the niches here. Then you'll, I'm sorry, you'll show the arch here. You'll show this, then you'll show the fireplace like that. Then the flue has its own sort of language about how it escapes the smoke outside the actual chimney place. So like that too. Okay, so any questions about that so far? Have I lost everyone's attention?
No, this is great.
Okay, good. Okay, so so drawing is of course an ethos, a methodology of just practicing drawing these things. The worst thing to do when you're sketching, let's take a look at, and pretend this is, a 2B or 4B pencil. I have to use the Sharp because I just blew $60 on this webcam and it's still blurry. Is that right? Is it still blurry?
Just a tiny bit.
Okay, so let's talk about just the nature of the freehand drawing. It takes a practice to freehand a continuous line like this. Can you guys see this?
Mm-hmm.
The faster you draw, the more accurate and parallel and perpendicular they're going to be. Because I'm always in a hurry, I'm juggling many things. But if to practice freehand, the worst thing to do to a freehand is do this called scratching, not sketching. It's this. My students just do this because they're so nervous they can't even draw a straight line. It's like just relax and maybe try to draw just 1,000 free-handed lines to practice your freehand. It's a type of meditation. You have to turn your phone off, turn the computer off, forget the internet, and just draw 100 lines to where you're just carefully making sure that each line is parallel to each other. You're not going to get good craftsmanship with line work if you're just constantly texting or you're in a hurry. There's no way, because the language of drawing is much more sophisticated than just trying to force. I've seen some terrible drawings from students where it's just it's called scratching. They just force themselves to draw. That's not sketching. You have to practice the methodology of just carefully, mindfully drawing each one of those lines to make sure they're parallel and perpendicular to each other. I've been drawing since I was 3 years old, so it's very easy for me to just draw a quick cube because I'm so used to drawing the orthogonal language like that. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like that. Okay, so if you want to draw some perfect circles, there's really no such thing as a perfect circle in freehand. But remember the techniques, because curves and circles in architecture are really hard to draw, especially if they're in perspective. Like this one, if I were to draw an arch niche in perspective, which we'll talk about on Thursday, is that this is quite a bit difficult to draw than just the elevational study of just the arch. Because of course this is a true half round. And by true half round, I mean, let's go back, and I hope I'm not boring you guys with these techniques, but this is really important stuff if you want to master the art of drawing. It's like, if you draw, you don't even have to draw the curve to draw a purpose. You just draw the distance, the midpoint. Then of course that's the radius. You just bing, bang, boom. The same thing on this side, the same thing on that. Then you just carefully go back and freehand. And what I always do is to practice drawing a clear curve, at least take it upon yourself and just practice drawing those dots again and again, and then just try to freehand and connect the dots. I kind of quit doing that technique because I like to draw quickly to where I'm just doing this, and I'm just drawing this. I'm just quickly drawing the curves, like you go around in circles. But it is kind of a wonderful technique to quickly draw curves like this. But it takes practice to kind of freehand a perfect circle like that. So then on Thursday, we talk about, we're going to be drawing curves in perspective. It's a totally different animal to draw curves. We're not really quite ready to do that. On Thursday, we're going to be doing is, we're going to be studying, I'm just running out of paper. I've drawn so much, which is a great quality to have. Let me get some trace rubber. So. You're going to be starting with vanishing point, and then you're going to be drawing perspectival lines in the perspective like that. But you probably can't see that. Hold on. Like this. Like that. So, with that language, look how easy it is to draw a 1-point perspective. I know people are very intimidated by this drawing system, but all you do is just draw a box, the vanishing point, which I'll talk about on Thursday. And then what you're going to be doing is casting the lines out and drawing a perspective box like that. You always start with the box, then you can break out of the box with some other information. So in other words, if you want to add some windows, then here's the box. Then all the lines go back to one vanishing point. This is just kind of a precursor. And then what we'll do is you can go back in and draw some windows. You can draw a doorway. Everything has to project back to the vanishing point like that. Then you can draw a doorway here. That's maybe possibly here. You can draw the thick wall condition like that. You can go back in and shade in. Then if this is a window that looks out to the sky at night, draw that black. Oh, wow, just a few lines in 10 minutes. Look how three-dimensional this drawing looks. Very basic informational stuff. Let me change the camera around to where you can see my my PDF again. This is the same. Can you guys see the PDF again?
Yeah.
What you just saw was exactly the same drawing type as each one of these perspectives. Very basic 1-point knowledge. That's exactly a very simple technique to do each one of these. Okay, with just a few tricks, you know, it looks like an intimidating drawing service, but with some of the stuff I've shown you in class, you should be able to really pull these off quickly. You know, it just takes some method of practice. Now, these are a little more complicated because they're perspectival cabins. There's angles and there's shadows. It's a very complex subject to draw. I just don't really like to rely on the computer software. It's just because I just love to see a three-dimensional image emerging from a flat plane. It's just a certain magic to it. You know, when I did computer renderings in AutoCAD, Rhino, and SketchUp, I just kind of lost the sort of ambition to maybe see a three-dimensional thing emerge off the page. Like definitely, if you look at my drawing table again, this is far more exciting than having the computer just do it for you. But of course, the computer is easier and more efficient. It can do the shades and shadows. But as a real architecture scholar, it's really important to understand these primitive drawing tools. And let me see what it is, 135. Okay, let me transfer our paper out and then we have another few minutes. And I'm just not used to drawing this much in class, which is great because I'm getting better at drawing and showing students how to do this. Let me regroup in about 5 minutes. I'll be right back. Okay, so I'll have to switch to the train. Can you see the drawing board again?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, what I would do between now and Thursday, if you really want to practice your drawing skills, I would just not, you know, your house, or I would go to SMU and draw. There's some beautiful little entry portals at SMU you can draw. Is the campus actually open right now? Is that completely closed off due to the shutdown? Does anyone know? Valerie? Well, anyway, if it is, what I would just do is I would just go out to the site and maybe just draw like an entry. Because like a lot of classical entries, there's the vestibule in the front. And the door is neatly designed back on the wall like that. To practice your drawing skills, then in your sketchbook, just draw a plan and then project up. Just some very simple orthographic projection methods. And then I would just try to draw the facade. You know, SMU, Mark Lemon was such a brilliant classical designer. Oh my gosh, those facades are extraordinary. These wonderful segmented curves. There's the Diocletian window and parts of it. I just would just study drawing true elevation studies. Here's, you know, project up the door like that, then go back in. And, you know, just go there at different times of the day and sketch and sketch what the solar angles look like. You know, maybe at 10 in the morning, the shadow's very, very dark and deep like that. Because, you know, obviously I'm showing you a recess in the wall. So in plan, if the sun is here, well, so watch this for a minute. I just corrected my elevation. The solar angle's here. Look how long that shadow actually would be. The whole door would be covered up with shadows. You know, if the sun was here, then the shadow would roughly be here like I originally drew. You know, there's just something magical about the way the sunlight animates facades and makes them look three-dimensional. So if I were you, I would just go out to, I mean, just find any sort of classical building. Of Charles Dilbeck House has wonderful entries where they're tucked in. It's hard to find the front door. you know, like that, and then maybe try to draw an elevation of that, draw the front door. You can practice drawing orthographic projection here like this. Then in your section, do some construction lines and go back in and draw what that looks like, the front door, so on and so forth. So that way you're not just drawing pretty postcard pictures of what the front door looks like. You have to draw the front door in context. And, you know, I'm just quickly doing these. I hope you're not totally confused, but you know, the first thing I would do is just try to draw just a simple entry with a recess in it. You can draw the front door. Maybe there's a bench like this. The front door is there. You know, classical architecture, the pediments project so far outside from the plane of the facade that it does have these really deep shadows in it. Now remember, the sun is a great draftsman, so what the sun does is takes this curve and just transfers it diagonally across the wall like that. If you really want to master the art of drawing shapes and shadows, you need trace paper to overlay these things. The same thing with the cornice or the pediment on the wall behind that. You just trace this thing like that. Maybe there's a volute like that. Shift it down 45 degrees and then just trace over that and draw it. You know, it's the same technique that I did that on a capital. And again, these are just some very, very basic drawing techniques that you can employ to make your drawings read better. This is just a very small fraction of orthographic projection. Really, orthographic projection is if you have the entire floor plan drawn. Can you guys still see the drawing table?
Yes.
Okay, good. You would really, the basic orthographic projection, you would be, you know, the computer draws the sections, everything for you, but the plans here, they would project up the entire elevation like this. Draw that, then you would be drawing the section across like that. So the projection is from plan and then from section like I showed you earlier. Okay, so let's go back to the Trevi fountain again one last time. Okay, let's skip the Trevi fountain. Let's look at this incredible, this Gothic window. I think that's at St. Mark's Cathedral. Can you see this?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it's very complicated. So how would you even approach this? You know, if as a beginning student, you would probably think, I'm just going to spend 5 hours and draw all the quatrefoils, the curves, the details, and not even draw the rest of the facade. What you would be doing is, it's a very complex shape, but you can draw this simply just based on the geometric relationships. And by that, I mean, it's like here's, can you guys see the red lines?
Yes.
Okay, so let's look at that. How would I draw the pointed arch? Of course, it's Gothic, it's not Renaissance. I could maybe measure with a piece of paper. Let's do, my studio is so wonderfully organized, you can hear that. So then we'll just measure this one. Wow, look at that. The arch is like 1.5 times the opening of that horizontal band. Then I would just draw the pointed arch like that, like that. Figure out where the centers are in this field. Maybe these are 45-degree angles to each other. Then I would just go back in and draw the circles. Boom. Most of the hard work is already drawn for you. Then the Gothic details are concentric around that curve, like that. Then maybe the height of this, can you guys see the height of that? So we just, can you see that?
Yes.
So we just measured here is a foundation point for the openings like this. You consider that 1/2, 1/2. Then maybe how tall is that curve? Possibly it's the same height as this window. Equally spaced. So we just took a very, very and of course you can tell that the pointed arches are at the center of each one of these windows. Then you would go back and draw the quatrefoils like that, like that. And if you guys are classes, you should know what quatrefoil is. 1, 2, 3 foils. 1, 2, 3 foils. Then nominally there is a circle in the center of that. Let's just forget about the griffin at the, but we're not going to be showing, I'm not going to be teaching how to draw animals and figures, so I'm really not that good at drawing. So if you look at very complicated subject, there is a geometrical way you can properly draw these. Let's take a look at the tower in the tower in San Giorgio Maggiore. If you can you guys still see the book?
Yes.
Okay, let me find something a little bit more compelling than that. Okay, can you guys see this one?
Yep.
Now this is a perspectival view, which means the tower is actually much taller, but in perspective, it's much smaller. So it looks like a very simple facade, but again, you can draw this with just some basic graphic techniques. You know, I would just try to draw, where does the square, is the whole thing fit into a square like that? Okay, yeah, it does. Look at that. So then this angle and this angle are probably the same angle. Where does this angle fall? It's roughly 1, 2, oh, perfect. 1, 2, 3/4 of the height. Then the center is 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. You already have the whole facade already drawn, which is a few geometrical strokes. Then you can figure out where the curve falls just by the nature of the geometrical analysis, that then you can start drawing this Renaissance facade. Very simple techniques. When I'm flipping through some very, well, it's really hard to analyze facades on an oblique like that. This is a wonderful Claudian facade. But, you know, let's take a look at that. I know it's not a true elevation, but let's give it a shot. An observation and from photographs, you know, does this fit into a square? Like, let's draw that. Where's the square? The 45-degree angle? Probably not. But is this a golden section? Let's see if that might be. You can draw the square like this. Bing, bang, boom. Whoa. Check it out. The whole facade is a golden section underneath the entablature. Then the frieze, the pediment projects above that. Then the columns are divided in 3 equal bays. All you have to do is divide this in half and draw the rest of the windows with shades and shadows. You got a beautiful drawing in your sketchbook right there. Okay, so let's have kind of a short review about what we learned earlier today. I don't have all the drawings with me, but we went over a lot of information in an hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours. You know, really to master this, I would just go out and find this beautiful house. You can go to Lakewood, you can go to S&D, you can go. I'd rather you do stuff in person than just on, because the photograph establishes all the boundaries for you. When you start drawing in person, then you'll start gaining a much better facile in drawing these things. I would just pick a simple subject like a doorway and draw the plan first. Like that. Then with guidelines, project up. And with our techniques on how to draw curves, you can draw an arched doorway simply and beautifully. And then I would probably go back And what I like to do is, can you guys see the graphite on this?
Yes.
Okay, you know, the elements that are much further in the background are much darker because you're establishing the background feels is further away in the depth than the front of the arches. Then you can go back and draw what's called the voussoirs. All the diagonals go back to the radius point. That is true masonry construction. And then go back in and draw the details for the masonry, so on and so forth. Let's kind of go back and look to some of, you know, some of the other ones I did are probably a little bit more complex for you to draw, like the cylinder, and then these that are drawn to show shades and shadows. This is probably a very simple subject, but very complex to draw with shades and shadows because you have to assume, like, just say a 45-degree angle, and that cast these on the floor. You can see my hand motions. This is exactly the same angle as this on the floor. Then you just project out 45 to where these points meet. This is exactly the same angle, and with proper shading of consistent green, then you have a proper shadow. Then this will be shaded in lighter because the part in shade is not as dark as the shadow because the shadow is the absence of light. Because on the shade part, there is reflected light from the ground up in here. And then what I would do is draw a boundary and just kind of lightly draw some shading in. You know, if the sunlight is right here on the top, then there will be no value. There might be a little bit of value here because it's not directly facing the sunlight. But you know, look how three-dimensional that dumb little block pops off the page. It's not really a dumb block. I mean, it's, anyway, I think you get my point. The same thing, let me see if I can find, well, I've already lost the other cylinder drawings, but you know, I think it's a pretty easy sort of small miracle to draw shades and shadows and make your sketches really pop out like that. If this were true orthographic projection, you would be drawing a plan first of the window, then you would draw the elevation after that. And then you would, of course, cast over and draw the cross section through that profile. There's the transom window like that, so on and so forth. Then I would just go back and crochet in the cross section of the mass like that. Okay, so let's go back to the PDF file. Hold on just a minute. Oh, you can see the elevation of the Louvre facades. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Okay, so it's a very complicated facade study, but some very simple information to quickly draw these. I think I drew this in about 5 hours. But all you have to do is do the line drawing first and then go back and draw the shadows with the same techniques I've just shown you. You can make your elevation or facades read very beautifully and three-dimensionally just with a few tricks. You know, it's remarkable to take this image and then go from here and then make that facade look so wonderfully three-dimensional. Now, these are much more complex, so we're not going to be talking about those today, but I just wanted to show you some basic quick sketching exercises. I would encourage everyone, since it's beautiful outside, to actually go out in person and sketch versus sketching in photographs, because it's much difficult to sketch in person because the boundaries are not established for you. But I mean, look how wonderful those arches pop off the front page just by the ink wash. This is not watercolor; it's called a diluted ink wash, which we'll talk about probably sometime next week. But you can see that the draftsman is carefully measured and drawn each one. This is not just from observation. These are very sophisticated drawing types. which we probably won't get into for a while in the class. But, you know, just look how beautiful just those simple shadows are with just the stairs themselves. You know, I love to show students the language of drawing, because most people don't realize that, you know, they communicate with drawings for thousands of years, and then it wasn't until much later, 3200 BC, they were mixing letters with iconography and making before the Greek alphabet. So drawing is extremely important for any sort of designer, any decorator, any student, any architect, any practitioner. You know, these are just magnificent drawings, the one from Auguste Choisy, especially the facades from Adam. It's the same shading technique, the shades each other. It's just a larger, more complicated subject, just drawn with some simple basic elevation studies that we showed in the class. The same thing with this one. Okay, I think it's probably 1:55. Do you guys have any questions about the assignment? Do I need to go over the tools that you need for the class, or any comments? Did I bore you guys to death? I hope not.
No, that was great. Thank you.
Any questions or comments? You know, when I taught high school, we probably have to go in a minute, but when I taught high school students, the seniors in architecture, you know, they were addicted to their phones. They could barely even pay attention to my lecture for maybe 5 minutes. And I hope that you were able to turn your phone off and focus and watch the tutorials, because it's really important. You know, part of the practice of architecture and drawing is being in the moment. If you're looking at your computer or texting on the phone all the time, you're not going to be in the moment. There's no way you're going to be able to do convincing studies like that if you're just in somewhere else. I mean, drawing for me puts me in the moment. I'm completely focused. I want to make this thing beautiful. I want to draw the proper shadows. You know, if you're on their phone the whole time, then I just think that's kind of a shame. And my students were guilty of doing that too. But we went over a lot of information. There's a lot of stuff for you to study and draw. Hopefully that this kind of gives you a better insight to the way you see the world, not even drawing it. Just a basic just improving your sort of observation skills. And then on Thursday, I'm going to show you how to draw 3 dimensions perspectival. It's my favorite drawing system to draw, to make a 3-dimensional image pop up with just a blank piece of paper. It's really wonderful to even see that.
Thank you so much. I learned so much today.
Oh, I hope you did. Because, you know, I always do classes in person, but I do classes online. If nobody responds, I really have no idea if I'm heard, but I'm glad you responded. Thank you very much.
Can I ask you, Jason?
Yes.
It's such a basic. When you're practicing your lines, drawing straight parallel lines, can you show us what your wrist is doing? Are you resting your arm on the table? Just sort of how to hold the pencil.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because when I teach piano lessons, and some of my students their posture is so stiff they can't even play more than like, you know, a third note. But let me get another sheet of paper. I'll show you. Yeah, that's a good question. You know, the pencil really needs to be held like this. Can you see my position? Like that?
Yeah.
It just rests comfortably like that. Because a lot of my students, they'll draw like this, and their posture is so stiff they can barely even construct a line. I'm like, just relax and just let the pencil fall in between the fingers like this. Then you're comfortably constructing a line very methodically like this. It can be wavy because you're going from point A to point B in a straight line like that. Definitely, you're not going to get really good results if your posture is really stiff and contrited like that. So it has to be very carefully done. And you know, with an HB or 2B, you can get a range of intensity. You can get very light, then you can put some more pressure and get it very dark and shade it like that. So the posture is really important too. And also, you're not going to get good results if your pencil is 1 inch. It's really good to get longer pencils because your posture will yield some better results like that. And then when you're shading, I just like to go back and forth like that. And then if you want to use a straight edge or a piece of paper to make sure that the shading is exactly crisp, I'm just holding the pencil like this. So you have a perfectly straight edge without even drawing a line. The best sort of value is to do the shading and not even draw a line. You need to make the value create the edge for you. The same. Sure, the same thing with this. Can you see this? Not this. This, because you're using the wedge-shaped part of the pencil to shade for you. Then with more pressure, you just go back down and place that. See, look how clean and crisp. I didn't even need to draw a line for that. If I wanted to intensify the shadow, I would simply just keep building it up in layers. See, I don't even need to draw one line, just the value makes the edge for you.
One more question, Jason.
Yes.
I understand is it geometry that you're showing us how to project shadow lines?
Mm-hmm.
To practice more, is there a book you recommend, or it really helps to look at all the samples that you drew?
Yes, I'm going to write on what's called my faux dry erase board. I'm used to being in class, so I have to just use this. Let me see if I can find a clean sheet of paper. There's two books, Shades and Shadows by McGoodwin, which was written, I think, in 1925, but it's still very relevant. Can you guys see the writing? It's actually Architectural Shades and Shadows.
Yes, and I'm going to take a screenshot.
And then I would get Carl Heuser. It's called, it's a free-handed drawing, but I haven't seen it in years. I think it's called, oh God, if you just look at Carl Heuser, I think it's called Perspective Drawing. And this book, if you look, you can find it because all the lines are blue. It's a blue book. The lines are blue or black, but it's Carl Heuser. It's Perspective and Shadows. It's published probably back in the 80s. I wish I had a copy of that. I don't think I have it with me. So really, these two books will show you how to study. And since you're beginners, you don't really have to focus on shaded and shadows. I'm just showing you how you can just quickly animate and make your facades more three-dimensional just by these two books. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Sure. I think it's Henry McGoodwin. Henry with an I, McGoodwin. It's 1920 is still relevant because the sun hasn't burned out since 1920, so we can still look at that and see shades and shadows. And then you can go to Frank or Francis Ching for architectural graphics. This is a very widely published book in all architecture. But I just think these two books are going to be more, and these are actually, both of these books I think I know McGoodwin's are published completely online. So you should be able to Google these images. I would definitely invest in buying the books. I just like to have books I can open up and smell instead of just going to the internet and looking at everything. My students do that, and it drives me nuts. They haven't been to the library in 2 years.
Carl's is freehand drawing and sketching.
Yes. Did you look that up?
Yes, I did.
Oh, good. It is. Yes, perfect. It's freehand drawing, not perspective. Great. Now, Carl Heuser's book is more freehanded. McGoodwin's book is a little more scientific, but they're both very excellent resource studies. You know, and then just, you know, for giggles and just for your own benefit, I like to get trace paper and draw. I'm just fascinated with called skyography, the art of casting and drawing shadows. And then I like to mix graphite to show the depth beyond that. And then you can take your pencil and with white pencil and make the elements project forward on the back of the cardboard. These are some really very compelling images. You can make your images look more three-dimensional. And then, you know, like say, if I know most of you guys are using a computer, if you're using the computer, then draw the facades on the computer, print them out, and just draw the shades and shadows on them. I try to get my students to do that. So that way you're not just manually calculating all the lines. You can draw this on the computer, print out, and do the shades and shadows. It's pretty easy. Okay, so any other questions?
I look
Thank you very much.
at the next 3 lessons.
Oh, good. Well, on Thursday, we'll be talking about perspective. So.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We'll see you Thursday.
Okay, I'll see you guys Thursday. Thanks for attending.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.